much and have a good evening.
Over the past few decades, local journalism has been decimated across the United States. Newsrooms have shrunk, TV stations have stopped sending reporters to small towns, and local papers have dwindled or shut down entirely due to corporate buyouts.
Local news is a keystone of democracy.
So what happens to democracy without local news?
There were reporters covering communities all over the state, reporters covering state agencies, reporters covering issues. We really covered pretty much everything.
This is David Owens, a former reporter who covered the state of Connecticut for 32 years, first at a small local paper and then at the Hartford Courant, the state's largest daily newspaper and the oldest continuously published paper in the United States.
When I went to the Hartford Courant, I went into a newsroom of 400 people. I saw that number decline dramatically to probably 40 when I left.
The steep decline Owens saw is mirrored in newsrooms across the country. 25% of all U.S. newspapers have shut down since 2005. Nearly 50% of counties only have one paper, typically a weekly. And as of 2022, 211 counties, where more than 70 million Americans live, don't have a local newspaper at all.
There's also the way the news business has changed. We've gone from a deadline of 5 o'clock in the afternoon to file your story for the next morning's newspaper to having to feed the beast all day. And that prevents you from perhaps doing the amount of detailed reporting that you want to do.
There's less coverage of environmental issues, there's less coverage of development projects, school board meetings, government corruption, police misconduct, and so much more.
This is Kate Ruan. She's the director of the U.S. Free Expression Programs at PEN America, a nonprofit that champions free expression through literature. The organization released an expansive report in 2019 that explored the decline of local journalism throughout the U.S.
Without local news reporters creating stories that the people within the community all trust and agree upon as being the basis from which political discussion can launch, then that is where we start to see diverging realities. That is where we start to see things like disinformation campaigns coming in to divide us even further. We see things like election denialism. We see things like a lack of understanding of environmental impacts.
This is in part because of the national sources people turn to in the absence of local news. These national outlets tend to attract audiences along party lines. Conservatives mainly watch Fox News, and liberals tend to rely on CNN, NPR, MSNBC, and the New York Times. When people consume their news in these echo chambers, increased political polarization shows up at the ballot box. Multiple studies have found that in jurisdictions that have experienced a decline in local journalism, there's less split-ticket voting. In other words, more people are voting for all Democrats or all Republicans than they were when they had local news to inform their decisions. Beyond this political division, there are simply fewer people voting in the first place. There's also less scrutiny of those running in local and state races.
There's been a lot of attention paid to the case of the congressman from New York.
Republican Congressman-elect George Santos.
Santos trying to minimize his lies as mere embellishments.
Republican Congressman-elect Santos says he is not going to step down.
I think it's very unlikely that in a vibrant local news environment, he would have been elected. Reporters would have asked him questions. When they didn't get straight answers, they would have asked the question again. When you don't have local reporters covering those local races, people slip through.
Less accountability for government officials has been shown to result in higher taxes, corruption, and environmental crises.
Let's look at what happened in Flint, Michigan, with its water crisis. In April of 2014, the town of Flint changed its water source from Lake Huron to the Flint River. In May of that year, the Flint Journal, a 4 times a week local news source, was already reporting on the story. And they stayed with it until it became national news. But it took 9 months of reporting before any outlet outside of Flint covered the crisis. Residents of Flint are part of multiple communities that have long been underrepresented and undercredited in national news coverage. Now, what would have happened to the people of Flint, who are a community who were raising concerns, without the Flint Journal? How many Flint water crises are we missing because there's no one covering them?
The Flint Journal is just one example. Many other local news outlets have uncovered massive crimes with wide-ranging impacts. Reporters at the Boston Globe were the first to reveal abuses in the Catholic Church in Boston. A Miami Herald investigative journalist exposed sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein after identifying and interviewing dozens of alleged victims. Indy Star reporters broke the story on Larry Nassar's longtime child sexual abuse. Without local journalists to uncover these stories, exploitation, abuse, and corruption slip through the cracks. On the flip side, moving beyond sensationalist if it bleeds it leads coverage of crime becomes more difficult when local journalists don't have the resources to dig deep or investment in thoughtful storytelling from the powers that be. Clearly, local journalism is at a crossroads. So what can be done?
Revitalizing local news will require investments that collectively total billions of dollars, and that cannot come from a single source, but will require concerted action from philanthropic, private, and public sectors. We support the federal government doing 3 things to support local news. The first is to stop the rampant consolidation and nationalization of news. The second is to create a commission that will study what the federal government needs to do to provide support to local news organizations, and specifically they should consider how and how much public funding to give to these sources. And third, they should pass tax credits that help support people to be able to purchase news sources and help support news sources to remain in business at this critical time.
I'm hopeful that there's a market out there for good journalism. I believe there is. I believe there's a lot of good people out there who care about truth and who care about reality. They need to put their money where their hopes are.